What's up, everybody? We are back. Midjourney Fast Hours. I'm not even going to do the episode count anymore because it does not matter. We passed the 5-episode threshold. We don't even care anymore. We're just showing up every week to do this thing. Drew Brucker, Rory Flynn. What's happening, dude?
Oh man, episode 6, like you said. Maybe we are counting. Quick little insight.
We
for
lied.
everyone.
We lied.
But man, this is awesome. I love doing this thing. It's just it's fun to talk about this stuff every day. We don't realize how much we actually talk about it outside of here. So therapy session for everyone. Let's talk about what's going on. V6 dust is cleared, and I think now we got some more insight into what's going on. But it's been good to have this new model and just like rip down the rabbit hole again.
I was gonna say, man, you're like my therapist without paying you. Like insurance is covering it. My kind of thing. Like we're just going in, we're going deep, we're getting all the frustration out, we're talking about all the excitement. It's a relationship, dude. It's a mutual relationship. So I appreciate that. And yeah, man, we got an awesome episode today. We have a banger of an episode because I think this is going to be a very unique episode so far, which is what this is all about. We're trying to cover Midjourney from all angles here, and this is a very, very important one. We're going to get into some of the best tools that exist right now to stack with Midjourney into your process. Whatever your process is, whatever you're trying to create, whatever you're doing personally, professionally, you're likely using other tools in assistance with Midjourney. And if you're not, you're missing out. But we're going to cover the 5 best ones in our opinion right now, which I think is super exciting. There's a ton to dig into there. Maybe first, Rory, we get into some of these updates with Midjourney V6.1 since the last time we chatted, what we know about V6.2, and we just kind of run through those real quick. What do you think?
Let's rock and roll through that. I think there's a couple things, and not to toot our own horns, but a lot of the stuff that is coming out, we have been discussing here. So maybe Midjourney's listening. That'd be cool. Hey guys, what's up?
What's up? It wouldn't surprise me either the way they operate their shadow organization. So
the shadow organization. That's right. That's right. I love them so much.
What was it? It was last week. What was it? No, 2 weeks ago we were talking about Silicon Valley, security, CIA. Now we're talking about shadow organizations. This is just how we roll.
Wouldn't be surprised if they're on the back end of something over there. They got no one knows who works there. No one knows what they do. No one knows any of their personalities. So in this world of personal brand is everything, they haven't seen a single thing. I've seen a couple pieces on the founder. I swear to God, that every person I've tried to look up on LinkedIn has either been maybe active once in the last 5 years. It's like they just they work in a silo or underground somewhere.
No profile picture.
Zero.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah. It really is. But I don't even think they have an Instagram account. That's just
I don't think so.
They
either.
Yeah. Right.
They're breaking all the marketing rules, like the brand awareness, the brand identity, the building trust, the typical way that brands think about all these things. They're not doing any of those, which I think is just insane. We talked about this a ton, but it just continues to blow your mind a little bit.
Here's a hot tip for all the marketers out there. Do exactly the opposite of what everyone says you should do. That typically works the best. So every time someone's like, do this, do the opposite. Typically that works. That works.
100%. Because what happens is everybody just tries to copy everybody else, and then everybody's doing the exact same thing. So again, how do you stand out in this crowded space of attention? You have to do other things. You have to zig when they zag. You have to zag when they zig. All the stuff.
You just look no further than Joe Rogan. Everyone's podcast got shorter and shorter and shorter, and his got longer and longer and longer. And who's the number one by, has basically more subscribers than anyone else combined in the world. So it's this is, again,
I think all of the ones that are at the top of the charts are typically long. I think there's always a place for both of those things, the long form content, the short form content, right? Obviously there are pros and cons to each, but I think, to your point, it's breaking the rules of what maybe people would speculate is the answer, right? And 100%. I think you can continue these things and, with longer episodes, right? You don't have to consume it all in one session, which could be a good thing, right? And I think it allows you to go into the depth, which actually makes things actionable, which is what I always look for in a podcast anyway. If I'm going to listen to something, I don't want to just hear ear candy about, oh, this is cool, we did this. Okay, great. But how do I do that? How can I take that to work? How can I think about this in my personal life, right? Like that part of it is what's attractive to me.
It's like hearing someone's recounting of reading a book versus actually reading it yourself. Like, oh, you get like that secondhand sort of, oh, this is, here's like the highlights. This is what happened. Here's the plot. Here's the conclusion. But like you don't get any of the actual context, which is where you find the learnings. So
Totally.
for all the people that summarize books on, social platforms, it's cool, but you got to go read them to actually get the value out of it.
Totally. Yeah. There are apps, right? Like, so Audible. Okay. Yeah. Let me listen to the audiobook. That's great. Then you have these companies like, I don't even want to throw them under the bus, but like Blinkist was the one that I'm from, where they take all the key takeaways and boil it down to like 2 to 5 minutes. And it's like, it's not the same. It's not the
summary.
Same. You think you're extracting all the great stuff, but it's just like, oh, so at the end of the day, it's just like words that I would read on any social post, right? It just doesn't resonate with you because you haven't taken that time
to
shallow. Attach.
Yeah. No depth. I mean, that's just personal opinion, guys. No offense to anyone who likes that stuff. It's just I need more. I'm not smart enough to pick up a couple lines of cliff notes and run with it. So, hey, we like context. It's what we do here. That's why we talk about this stuff for a goddamn hour. So
absolutely, dude. All right, let's dive into some of these quick updates with office hours and what we heard last week. So, in painting interface is getting upgrades. Talked about that last week.
Hell yeah.
Awesome. Don't know any more details beyond that. I don't know what that entails. They didn't share that. Also know that there are new functionalities and upgrades coming with the scribe feature. I know that's been talked about a few times on office hours in terms of like upgrading that. I don't know if that comes in 6.2 or not. Could be 7, but that's going to be worked on. Also, there are some exploration tools that will be added to the website. Also don't know a whole lot about that, but I would imagine that might have to do with things like style codes or maybe even types of imagery that maybe you can sort by, or maybe just some additional ways to go into specific things that you care about. I don't know, but I think that's super interesting. And then also lastly, just that full sync that they're trying to do between Discord channels and the web platform. They've done some of that with the rooms, but I think they're trying to find an ideal way to fully transfer that over.
Did they also say they were going to work on the zoom in? Was that part of the office hours? I feel like I read that. Maybe I'm just like dreaming it up. But if I heard that there was I think I'm just reading the cliff notes that there was some zoom in functionality coming, and I think that would be awesome if we could actually do that. So
I know we talked about that too. Like I don't remember that from the office hours. I remember bringing that up when we first talked about it on an office hours, and then David I think answered it very quickly as he was going through questions and just said something like, well, why would anybody want to zoom in or crop, and it's just like, well, I don't know if you want to pass by that, that quickly, because like to stay in the tool and further refine your image without adding a bunch of additional post-processing sliders, for example, doesn't seem like that big of an ask, you know what I mean? And I think it would be super effective. So that might be the case. I just don't know too much about it.
Yeah, because like if you have a good image, right, and sometimes there's like one or two things that are really off base, and in painting's not going to work because we know that in painting doesn't work that well when you're trying
correct
for certain things. So I might want to crop it out, but also when you crop it out, you have to take it off platform, and then from there potentially you have to upscale it, and then from there potentially have to do some other post processing. So to me, it's just another feature to like keep us on the platform, and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, like legit. It's all things that Midjourney doesn't do that potentially, you have to do elsewhere. So, these things, you'll see it. They'll probably end up being features down the line because all these things, we always had to, like, upscalers, right? Like, you just think about that. Before they added that feature, we had to take it off platform to upscale. Same thing with in painting. We had to take it off platform to upscale. And a lot of the tools that we're using now in comboing, really, that's because those features don't exist there. But if they did, and they were good, wouldn't have to go somewhere else and pay for another tool. So not saying, but not dissing Midjourney in any way, shape, or form. They have to develop at a certain pace, and not all of it can get done at once. But, we all have different needs for this stuff, and that's why we're going off platform. So
Yep.
I think I think their roadmap pretty much at this point lines up with a lot of these things that we're talking about. So it's interesting to see how it's going to develop, because I think there's going to be a consolidation at some point.
Couple, they keep mentioning secret projects are underway too. They're not going to reveal those. They said maybe we'll reveal them. Hopefully we'll reveal those by the end of the year. So that's still another, 4.5 months away until we maybe find out what those things are. That's
Grok.
That's a big question. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Could be.
who knows, dude? I think the end of this year sounds pretty exciting, because you could potentially have V7. You're talking about an additional 4 months of upgrades that are coming. It seems like, to your point, and we mentioned this, like, let's start upgrading some of the tools that already exist.
Yeah.
You're starting to see some of that come back. That's been a while since they started focusing on that again. So I'm super excited about that. The other quick things let's just run through before we move on is around 6.2. So they're just talking about that in-painting and zoom-out capabilities being in sync with 6.2. 6.2 is going to have its own, unique take in terms of like enhanced coherence, text, balanced default aesthetic. I think they're also going to try to weave some of those personalization aspects into it as well, because they're going to have more data. And that leads me to the last key point on that, which is they're going to do another one of those surveys to users. I don't know if did you do that first survey around demographics?
Yeah. Yeah, I did it real
Okay.
quick. I wonder
Okay, I did
if that
that too.
affected us at the personalization codes at all or anything. I don't know.
I don't know. They didn't talk about how they were using those just yet. I think the psychometric survey is going to be more based on maybe our upbringing and why we like certain things. And they're trying to, I think, really scrape and assess like why that would be the case, and maybe make some, hypothetical or hypothesis around, hey, somebody that's this age that came from here that has this background, they tend to like this, right? Are there any patterns that exist there? So that could be interesting. I would be more interested to see how they're going to use that data. Hopefully they don't completely internalize it, but
Or do anything nefarious. Midjourney.
right. like we mentioned, Midjourney is just a psyop, it's just
Probably.
it's a big, yeah.
Just to really map our brains. It's how we think and how we want to create.
Yeah.
That's talk about a good sci-fi plot right there.
That's right.
Map my imagination with data.
Last 2 points on this before we wrap is just they're considering a multi-profile personalization system, which I think we all want, right? The ability
100%.
to have maybe multiple personalization codes that are used for different kinds of situations. Lastly, integration of depth control net. We talked about that before just briefly. There was some thought that could coincide with 6.2. I don't know that to be the case. They are talking about 6.2 by the end of the month, so we're really talking about 3 weeks here. I don't know how far along there are with depth control net, so that's just a question mark. We'll have to wait and see.
Interesting. It feels like a interesting play to have 6.2 so close to 5.1. I don't remember 6.2 so close to 6.1, because I don't remember 5.2 being that close to 5.1. I feel like 5.1 came out relatively quick in a comparison to V5, and then like we waited for 5.2. This feels like the opposite. So, I love that they basically train and develop this stuff in parallel though. So like 7's been going on for a long time. So they're refining, they're doing things, they're training, they're building bigger brains over there, but because that's like, I guess that's the way you have to do it. You can't just like start from scratch once this new model is
Totally
take forever. Can imagine what the investment is to train a large model like that. But hey, that's not part of this podcast today. We'll keep it moving.
Speaking of that, we need to keep it moving because we have to get into these 5 tools that we're stacking with Midjourney right now that, in my opinion, are no-brainers for some of the things that we're doing. Hopefully, it's some of the things that you're doing. You're probably using some of these tools already. So I think the real goal here is to identify the top 5 in our opinion, how we're using them, how you could think about using them. Maybe there are some surprises in there. I'm sure there are. And, really kind of use this as a way to power up your existing capabilities and tool belt within, the AI image gen world. So that I think is really the goal. With that in mind, let's get into number 1.
All right.
Number 1. No, we don't have drums, do we? We don't have like a little drum roll thing. I'm going to add that in here. Drum roll to number 1. No surprise here. ChatGPT. wop, 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 right? Like ChatGPT, LLMs, everybody's using an LLM in some way, probably at this point, in terms of who's listening to this podcast. The question is, how are you using ChatGPT in combination with Midjourney? So let's start with you, Rory. Dive in. Tell us a little bit about some of the different ways that you use ChatGPT in combination with Midjourney, as well as if you want to focus on a singular one or talk into one more specifically.
Totally. So I've gone down a lot of different avenues with this. Naturally, I think everyone goes right to prompt generation. I think that one's pretty simple and usable. Now, again, it's how you do that and basically to get the best results out of it. Now, again, when you're doing prompt generation, to me, you really want to start with a formula because Midjourney will read that and cut and like basically instructions. You can build this into a custom GPT. I remember doing this before we had custom GPTs, and I just had like one chat window that was my prompt generator for certain things that I wanted to do. But I had trained it on, basically how to look like or think like a professional photographer and a creative director. And what I wanted to do was give it a prompt formula. Basically, here's something, let's call it shot type, subject in action, lighting, texture, composition, camera type, all these different things. And then, give the instructions if we want to use short and punchy, visceral language. We want to think about this, like award-winning composition, blah, 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 blah. And then you generate and you get, basically you just give it an idea like, oh, can we generate a, woman walking in Tokyo, right? And then bang, it would just shoot out the prompt, run it through. That's a great way to get something done. Now, that's very baseline. I think a lot of people are doing that. But, there's some more interesting things, right? Like I utilize it for, number one, for prompt formula generation. Now, prompt formulas, right? Like we've talked about this before, like to use a pretty standard set of like, we know we want to control these little variables and aspects of the image, whether that be, the lighting, the composition, the shot type, those different pieces. But to me, what makes Midjourney great is that you have this high level of control. So how can you go deeper into the images that you want to create? So I use this example, if you're doing food photography versus real estate photography, they both have different elements that compose them. So think about food photography, right? Like what pieces of an image can you actually control? So if you were going to be an art director doing a film, product shot or just like, like an editorial shot for, a food piece, what can you actually control in that? Everything. So not just the lighting, not just the composition, but what's the plating like? What does that look like? What's the garnish? What other types of props are in there? So, look at something like that where, it's going to be more important to have some sort of like food photography, again, like how it's cooked, what the garnish is, what the plating is, what the setting is, how that all looks in comparison. So adding those into a prompt formula and structuring it, and then looking up like unique categories essentially for that. So real estate, you might want something like the architecture type, what type of structure or textures are involved, different design styles, things like that. So that's radically different than what food photography is. So if you think about each category of what you're trying to create, that's a good way to go in there and figure that out. So, been able to build out more robust prompts by breaking down an image into categories. I think, that's one thing to consider when you're trying to build these better aesthetics. Now,
I think that's a great point, Rory. Not to cut you off, but I think that's worth really just digesting, because there is natural language that exists and varies based on those different types of photography. So you just mentioned, food photography versus architecture. Do you know those terms? And like, for example, how do you instruct using language that Midjourney is going to interpret and understand a certain food to lay on top of a certain food or be positioned in a certain way, right? Like that's different than trying to prompt something that is got people in the shot, right? Or this or that or the other, or an architecture thing. So I think there's almost this natural language barrier that exists in each niche, right? Depending on the type of image that you're generating. So I just think that's an important point to point out as you're walking through that.
Totally. And I think, you look at it, it's like how everything comes back to breaking images down into words. It's almost like coding, right? Like you have to code every little piece of an image. This is only if you want a lot of control and you want a lot of dynamic sort of say, essentially, in what you're creating. So, something like that, like you take an image, you break it down, like really into its unique individual pieces, then you can build it back out, and then you have control over every piece. So then, even if you like, you don't like something, you can go and easily switch it up. So maybe I don't like, parsley as a garnish and I want dill. You can go, label dill as the garnish instead of parsley, right? Sometimes that's just as simple as, having this broken down into a structure that you can just fill in. So that to me was one of the better ways that I've used it, to like really find those fine detailed categories that can be super important. Because something like fashion too, right? Like you want to do, it might not be what the garnish is, it might be what the jewelry is, it might be what the texture of the fabric is, or what type of fabric it is, because that makes a big difference. So, right, like that's one thing. I'm gonna pass it over to you because I know you've utilized this in the same way in terms of like it's a good segue from the basically the regenerate or the breaking down of an image standpoint, because that's something that, again, why do we have to use that? Because describe maybe isn't the best all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think for me, like same thing. You were doing that with ChatGPT. I think before even wanted to mess with it. Like I was really just trying to do everything in Midjourney. But then, I think there were certain cases where just like, oh, I could actually do this a lot better using ChatGPT as an aid. And so for me, some of those things were storytelling, right? Like, so if you are generating some sort of thematic group of images to tell a story of some kind, right? Which I think is very applicable or practical use of something like Midjourney. Then ChatGPT is awesome for that, right? Because you could say, hey, ChatGPT, this is my vision for, this group of, maybe like, let's just say you created a group of photos first and you said, okay, these 3 images, can you build a story around these 3 images and make it blank, 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 and blank? Okay, cool. Now I got a story like this story. Oh, I always ask for a few options too. That's always my cheat code. Give me X number of options.
Yeah.
Because, that first option may not be great. Plus you can always like rip and combine and almost Frankenstein an ideal option for you too, which I think is probably an underrated thing. But yeah, you could start with the images, or you could say, I have an idea for this, right? I want you to write me prompts based on this structure, right? So to your point, if you've got a structure in mind that you really like, take that and say, okay, here's the structure. I want you to give me 50 prompt ideas that will fall in line with this story arc or this narrative, right? And so you can build it that way too. And I've done that a few times, which I think is an insanely cool use of something like ChatGPT or any LLM for that matter. So like what I can do here is I'll just show my screen just to kind of like provide some visual elements of what I'm talking about.
and while you're pulling that up, I think the one thing to note here, which was very interesting when testing 5.2, was this was how like I went about figuring out what Midjourney liked at that point. Was the exact thing you said, was giving options, but there was a way that I did it so it would spit out 3 different types of prompt structures. I had it structured as 1, which was super high level keywords that were more generic in nature, so it'd be a shorter, more like punchy prompt. Then I had 2, which was basically the way that I like it, which is a lot of details but like short and concise phrases. And then 3 was like super long narrative prompt. So I'd run those 3 to see which one gave me what I was looking for. And I was like, oh, okay, I get more control with this one than I do with this one, or this one worked better. So that was like an interesting way to go about testing this stuff, instead of having to go and write these narrative prompts that a lot of people do when they you get these generators too.
That's a great point too, because prompts coherence and the way that it understands the prompts has changed model to model sometimes too, right? Like so
totally.
I think to balance those things out is super smart. This is just a quick example to show you how you could create sort of a cohesive, I guess, group of images while also telling a story using ChatGPT, right? So if I just go to this right here, like all the copy that's in here from ChatGPT, right? I had it write this series. I then used, this was before SREF codes. So just kind of describe things in the same way, or maybe I used an SREF image for this. I can't remember, but obviously they all feel cohesive and a part of that story. They have sort of that cool bluish green color to them, right? And so that's how you can utilize ChatGPT to tell more of the story arc or storyboard. and really, I guess, maximize both tools at the same time. The other thing I think that stands out to me as a way to use it, and I've been using it a lot, is through reverse prompting, is just what I call it. But essentially, it's the idea like describe. You take an image, and I created a custom GPT for this. Not hard. Anybody could do this. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this image. It's going to spit out, of course.
Classic.
Of course. Okay, so it's going to spit out a very detailed description. Now, I've tried a few things, right? Like to your point, Rory, I could set up this GPT in a way that gives me 3 different options, based on prompt structure. Like I could do one that is more very like tight, like photography type, X, subject, Y, action, Z, right? Like all those as an option. But this one is just a very long descriptive prompt. And the way that I sort of set this up is, hey, can you give me a description of this image as accurately as possible as if you're describing this image to somebody that cannot see, right? So it goes into very detailed stuff. Usually it's a very long thing. I was really kind of a little bit unsure how well that would work, in something like Midjourney, but it actually works quite well. I'll just go ahead and pull up, what I got back from that, right? So let's go back to the original. And it's not going to be a word for word. I did not use an image weight for this, right? So I didn't then take this picture on top of the prompt. This is a whole new thing. And I got this, right? So you can kind of see how it's a similar theme, but it's a different image, right? It's very close to the original, but it's different. And you could go in and you could take, it's got the same outfit and things like that. If I wanted to change that out, I could. I went as far as kind of putting Pantone colors in here because there was a period of time where I actually thought they were taking that into account. I don't think that's the case, but it does get you pretty close in terms of like what you're going to get back. And then, like this is super powerful if you want to stack the description with the image, right? Because then I could pretty much get almost a 1-for-1. Let's just take this prompt. Let's do this. Let's run turbo.
Nice.
It's not going to let me upload it. Okay. Well, of course we're having troubles while we're trying to do a live demo on this. But yeah. I think the point is clear. Like here's the benefit of using it in this way. The reason I use that is if I've got an image and I'm not sure how I want to prompt for it, or I've scoured, maybe the explore page or search, and I'm not really seeing anything that already exists that would help me build that prompt, this is perfect for that. Right? If I've got an image or an essence that I'm trying to recreate and build in real time for myself, I would use that reverse prompting trick. I think that's a great way to not start from scratch to build something and then just take something that already exists and make tweaks to make it yours, right? So I use that a ton. I think that's an underrated thing. Have you done anything like that?
Oh yeah. That was something that we did for basically how we reverse engineered our brand imagery, right? To build out new imagery was we had to come up with a GPT that could actually extract like precise details. I can guess, right? But like a lot of times, like there's some real precision that's needed for branding aspects. So, when people were asking me what it was called and things like that, I mean, reverse prompting sounds perfect for exactly what it is. I just made up the term asset hacking and like it just sounded cooler because it was a presentation. I was like, ooh, asset hacking. Yeah, that's like so marketer of me. But it was, again, we take like brand images and basically, again, if we have our structure and what we can actually control within an image, we're talking, like I said, shot type, colors, textures, lighting, composition, basically if we could take and extract the brand of the image, we could change the subject and the action, but keep the brand the same. So that was the idea of like reverse engineering this stuff, especially with when ChatGPT came out with the vision capabilities to actually look at this stuff and do it.
Yes. Yes.
And then we built a GPT for doing that. It was just you drop an image in, it spits out the prompt and exactly like what we were talking about before, just like those categories of details, take it and run with it, paste it right in there, go. So that was huge for us when we started utilizing it that way. The other way that's been fairly interesting too is to like put variations in it from different different variables within the prompt, right? Like when I look up I mean, there was a time when we figured out that, oh, cameras work. Like, what other cameras actually work? You know, you're just like, give me a list of 50 really super high quality cameras. And you're like, give me a list of 50 creative cameras. Like, what can we get unique visual aspect from? Give me like 50 unique photography effects. Give me 50 unique film stocks, right? Like that stuff all can be super helpful within there, like tokenization. Also randomizing. I think some of the stuff there too is like, I've done this before where it's like, here's my prompt, like randomize the light composition and whatever. Like I want the same subject in action, but I like don't like this look and I want something else. So like a randomizer effect with that. Sometimes it's just like, I think everyone probably here has the same problem every once in a while. Like we get into these patterns and we generate the same stuff and it's like really hard to go outside of your purview. I personally have that problem. My stuff to me looks a lot of the same because I have a very specific style that I like. So sometimes it's hard. And especially if I'm going into a category I don't know. Like if I want something that looks like it's anime and I know nothing about anime, right? Like what the types of designs are, like how that's constructed, like what themes there are within anime. I would never know that unless I went and did a ton of research, but sometimes you can just pull some keywords that might help. So
that was such a huge unlock, I think,
Yeah.
early on in this Midjourney journey, which was using it in that way to identify all those things that you just mentioned, like camera angles, composition, expressions, film stocks, right? Like, I think that was like going back to some of the content you and I created a lot last year was around that because a lot of people didn't know to really do that. And I think it's even for people like us that are really exposed to some of these terms in a lot of ways too, like it's much easier to get a full list of those things then try them out than it is to like try to recollect those things on the fly and say, okay, let me think of all the different, so that's a great way to try and test and experiment with the tool, which is, I think, a really great way to up level within something like Midjourney because you know what works, you know what doesn't work. There are certain cool camera angles that don't work that I wish worked, right? Like, for example. So, I think knowing those things only makes you a better creator within Midjourney. I think the other thing that stands out too with like the GPT specifically. I've got a client right now that's trying to build a GPT specific to their brand with my help. So we're like just going through all the camera angles they like to use, all the expressions they like to use, all the, demographics of the people they like to use basically, and have that randomizer effect, like you just mentioned, where it's got, can basically just create these randomized prompts on the fly, taking into account all of those variables across each category to create a unique prompt. That's super cool, right? Like, so there are so many use cases. Lastly, I guess you mentioned this very briefly when we first started talking about it, but sort of like this feedback loop of ChatGPT, because it has that vision approach, you could even use it as a consultant or a photographic advisor or creative director advisor. Say, hey, compositionally, how would this look? Or on a scale of, like grade this from an A to an F under these variables or these categories, what would you rate this image? I actually haven't done that. We should do that. But you know what I mean? Like you can get to that level. This is just that's why I think this is the number one tool. I don't know that we built this on a, number one means number one kind of thing, but I do think ChatGPT deserves that love because there just are so many variable use cases.
So you can do some really crazy stuff with this, and ChatGPT has been pretty instrumental in a lot of things. Like sometimes I'll do carousel cover or organic social post, things like that. I'll put the two covers that I'm deciding between. I say, give me your opinion on which one is more visually striking. Break it down, and it'll be like,
didn't even think about that.
Visual heat mapping. Sometimes it's like, give me your analysis on the heat map of where your eyes are drawn in this. Like that's more for the marketing and branding stuff that we're doing. But it's just like, whenever you have an idea, it's just ask ChatGPT because it'll help you. I mean, we've also utilized it I've told people to utilize it as a creative partner too, like what you're saying, where, I typically have I put this in my course. It's called the three Ps, or 3 U's, whatever the hell I put in there. It's a unique person, unique place, unique position, things like that. So like I want someone that's doing something in a cool place and they're doing, profession might be the other P, where it's like they're doing some sort of like, really crazy job. Like maybe it's a rock climber in Antarctica, something like that. You know what I mean? So like if I give them that framework and then I say like, interview me, like you're like you're a creative director interviewing a client, and then like start to pull ideas out of me like that's a great way to get some stuff, like to get some really creative images, so you can be a creative partner like that. It doesn't have to be your actual prompter. It can just be like to generate ideas, so then it's, it'll give me like a snake herder in like the Malaysian like salt marshes or something like that. And I'm like, all right, that's freaking cool. Yeah, I would go prompt that. So not come into my head initially, but like, if I'm watching Nat Geo, that would pop into my head as something like, oh yeah, that was a really cool image. I want to go make that, or actually like take that idea and run with it. So there's no end to it. And I think that's probably the craziest
I think
thing about it.
that is a great way to sum it up. There is no end to it. I think there are a couple examples that we just gave that people didn't know about, but I also think there are examples that people have used that we didn't say that I would love to know about. So if you guys do have other, drop them. We would love to try, figure out, and just think about things a little bit differently too. Rory, before we move on to tool number 2, you have anything else with ChatGPT that you want to focus on?
Also, only because YouTube says I should do this, if you guys could like and subscribe, that'd be awesome. Shameless plug, doing it right in the middle here. But no, that's the everyone says to do it, so we're doing it. But there's for that one, man, like I could probably go on for a whole podcast on ChatGPT. Maybe we'll have to do one. We'll do a
maybe we do that.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
There's so much to do with it. But I think, it's just getting creative. Again, it's like, whenever you think you need a tool or something to go look for, like a heat mapping tool, right? Like I used to use that for ads where I'd be like, I want everyone's eyes to be drawn to the call to action button. Like, is that a thing? You don't have to go through some super expensive product. Now we can just get an analysis, right? I mean, it's just so much easier than, or at least comparing and contrasting too. It gives you a much better compare and contrast than maybe going through a more expensive tool. So that's it for ChatGPT for now, because we do have other things to talk about.
We do. But
yeah,
I think that's a great point that you just brought up too. Think about the vision part of ChatGPT, because I think that maybe is the underutilized part of it right now, because that's still somewhat of a new thing versus how a lot of people were accustomed to using ChatGPT, which is more for the brainstorming, kind of ideation part of it. But the vision component, I think, unlocks a ton of new use cases in itself, some of which we covered. So I think that's a great point. Let's get into tool number 2, which is Runway.
Hell yeah.
Something my man here knows a ton about, because anytime he drops anything on Runway, this shit goes viral. But for good reason, because, Rory's been playing with Runway for a while now, right? Like AI video gen still is, in works, right? Like it's getting better and better. It's not quite there yet. And when it does, things are going to explode. But I think what Rory's been able to accomplish in Runway, even right now, has been pretty fantastic. So let's go into that a little bit. Tell us about, Runway specifically, how you're using that, maybe the use cases in which you're using that for right now. What's working well right now? What's not working well right now?
Totally. Yeah, man. So Runway was a big unlock when it first came out. Gen 2 was very good, but it was still like you could tell it was AI. Like it wasn't totally polished. The problem they had originally was that you'd upload a super high res image and it would like drop the resolution right away. So you had to then go upscale it somewhere else, and it just never looked right. So Gen 2 was usable. It was usable in certain mediums. We used to make videos on there and turn them into GIFs, and that would go into email, that would go into social, things like that. Because that's, again, it's a GIF. It doesn't have to be super precise and super high clarity, especially in small format like mobile.
Like that. Hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. So that was because, again, I'm thinking about all this stuff. It's like, yeah, video. It's like, you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a Super Bowl ad. It can be a GIF. It can be something super small, because you can just turn it into that. Also, like B-roll for organic social. That's where it worked a lot, very well too. Or you'll see a lot of YouTube channels and things doing it now, like that are storytelling. Maybe it's a podcast or something along those lines. And they'll have supporting visuals. Like that stuff works because you don't necessarily have to go look for stock footage. You can make it yourself. So utilizing Midjourney with Runway has been awesome, because you can text prompt straight into Runway and it gives you awesome generations, but it's not as consistent. Like if you want consistent characters, consistent look, obviously Midjourney is top tier from a creativity standpoint. So like we can utilize that, and then you can also build a consistent look. So like there's a few things. I'll show you probably a super easy like use case for it, because for one thing, Like we're always trying to turn assets. Like how do we take one thing and turn it into other things, right? Like in what we're doing. So always like, how can I take one image and turn it into 1,000, right? That's how we reverse engineered those assets and then made a lot more from them, the same way we were talking about with ChatGPT. But now that you have these assets, can these be a static image and a moving image, right? Like, so how can we take, then that turns it into two. So 1,000 images becomes 2,000 assets, right? Now we just have building on top of each other. So like something like this, let me share my screen. Hopefully this won't crash. Bring this up. So like this is something that we would do right here. I'll full screen this so that everyone can see it. Apologies for the soft R&B funk music there. But if you're looking at this, right, like this is a still image that we created, and then we'll animate it like this, and that can be an asset. Like this here, there's a little bit of I'll be completely candid, there's a little bit of a like mess up right in the middle, but you can see how it takes this Midjourney image perfectly and then animates it. So you can have,
that one's sick, dude.
right? So this is B-roll, this is whatever. This could work as a GIF in an email. You know, we've utilized something like this for ads, like this image specifically, like pulling that into the camera. So that's like what you're seeing on your Facebook or your Instagram ad, right? So that can be super simple. It doesn't have to be this crazy full-on 2-minute cinematic production. It can be something as simple as taking, you know, this egg sandwich and giving it some goddamn motion, right? That's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be something crazy. Now,
I love that example. Yeah.
right. If you want to go for something that's more crazy, let me make sure you guys might get a pop of sound here when I expand this. But so if we're looking at this, right, like I'm just taking straight up Midjourney images. I'm using my personalization code here, and then we're running it through Runway. Now, again, this isn't probably this post went fairly viral across a ton of platforms. It got picked up, but because it's just different than what you're seeing out there, not a lot of people are trying to do humans. There's a lot. I asked the tool a lot here when you think about what it has to actually produce, which is, you know, we're talking about not just human motion, but the camera's moving. We have background motion. We have people moving in the background, multiple subjects. I asked for tattoos. That's really hard for AI to keep consistent majority of the time. A lot of these shots also have a combination of natural and artificial light in there. So when you're looking at that, like right here, we have natural light and we also have artificial light, right? Like that could be super confusing to a tool. Also here, same thing. You look at this guy's got tattoos, you know, he's playing the decks. We got this one. I don't even know how they let me through with this one, but they did. You know, so there's really some dynamic here. And you can see some of the motion. This shot coming up here is probably one of my favorites of all time. I don't even know how this is possible. If you look at this one right here with this girl and her hand dancing, just the way that the shadow's even interacting with her face, the fact that
insane
exists, right? This is such stupid like details to notice, but the way that her hand, again, her hand in the Midjourney image, right? This is interesting. Hand in the Midjourney image, totally fucked up. But because I prompted for motion, right, it's not like clearly defined. Now, down here, you can see the hand is perfect, and it's creating the shadow on her face. And she's got the motion, and then at the end here, you know, we wrap this whole thing up. So Midjourney and Runway, to me, power couple. And what we can do with this, and a few tips on this for anyone that's listening, you know, prompting motion into your Midjourney images helps a lot with Runway. If you're utilizing something like a static image, like a fashion pose maybe, to me that never gets the same results in Runway because you're asking them, like if you're saying, okay, here's a, you know, fashion pose, and then you're like, you know, put both hands in the air and then like wave them around, you know, that doesn't, it's hard for it to do that. But if their hands are already up and they're already like in motion, like maybe sometimes someone's twisting, like there's the shot of the girl that I was, you know, right in the beginning where she's cheering over the crowd. She's already halfway turned. So it's like it goes with the motion.
So,
right?
so you basically need, what you're saying is you almost need to give it some breadcrumbs to work with. The more
Correct.
static it is, the more potentially con variables that come into the mix, right? Like to mess the image up versus, you know, if you're doing somebody that's walking, right? If they've got that motion of walking in a certain direction, that feels like you kind of probably know what you're going to get along with the text prompting aid to get the end result that you're looking for. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, so this is I'll actually pull up one more example here. This is actually a perfect example of what we're talking about because I think a lot of people try to animate cars, right? And there's something with cars that tends to give Runway a problem. Now,
While you're pulling that up, actually, so for me, I was prompting a car the other day. I just got into Runway. I am not on Rory's level at all, but he's been telling me, dude, you got to get on Runway, got to get on Runway. I've just been kind of waiting for the tech to get to a certain place. I think it is probably there now. I jumped in, to your point, did a car. It was, in the prompt in Midjourney or in the photo in Midjourney, it was just a static image of a car in an alley. No motion blur like you see here and what you're showing. And, tried to prompt something like that or put something like that into Runway. Obviously, like, I'm not an expert yet in sort of the prompt text aiding the motion per se, but the car just kind of slid to the left. It didn't go forward like I was expecting it to go. So I say all that to say, to our point here, it sounds like putting something in motion already in a static image, you're going to increase your likelihood of getting the result that you want.
100%. So like with cars specifically, it's going to be a problem because if you have a static image of a car with a very static rim, like it doesn't know to necessarily animate that. So when you're prompting, especially things in Midjourney, hot little tip, you can prompt spinning wheels. So it looks like the wheels are spinning. Also, sometimes that doesn't help because if you have, a background that's fairly static and clear, also the car tends to move backwards a lot. For whatever reason, I don't understand why it just like picks that up. But if you can get this motion blur effect, which is pretty much all you have to prompt, motion blur. So like you can see like the lines are going to the right, like they are flowing to the right, which then gives Runway this like little head start on what exactly you want to do. So that when it's going, like it just knows to go that way and the wheels are spinning, right? So it's pretty much like it comes down to the reference image. And also sometimes when you're text prompting, driving to the left or, even if we go into this example here, these are a little bit more, there we go. Sorry for the music, but these are a little bit more dynamic. Like you'd have to put in the text prompt, like driving towards us or driving towards the frame. Like you want to tell it that because if not, might just start rolling backwards, right? This one, I think I just got lucky on this next one because it has a track and a path with the road. Basically, I was saying driving towards us on a curved, muddy road, or driving away from us, on a curved, muddy road. And this is how, it can end up really driving and hitting that track. Now, it's not perfect, but it's good. Because you'll see there's a lot of instances here where you just end up wasting a lot of gen time because it's just hard. So
yeah, I think that's a great tip.
Yeah.
I wish you would have dropped that tip before I exhausted all of my Runway hours in literally 20 minutes.
I got to do some more Runway stuff, like where I actually break it down. It's just there's so much content that needs to get made. Sorry, guys.
I know. Yeah, it's just it's just a whole nother beast. So I think that's a great point. You have anything else you want to wrap up with Runway before we move on to the tool number 3?
No, just like if you're looking for just at the like prompting wise, when you're text prompting and or image prompting, just remember you're working in like 4-dimensional space or 3-dimensional space, whatever it might be. It's not image like, okay, here's, you're flat, right? Like the camera motion is really what is important in that. So the camera motion can go forward, it can go backwards, up, down, diagonal, how, whatever you want. You have to be able to prompt those. So looking again, another good use for ChatGPT, if you don't know them, look up the camera motions, shot types, things like that for cinema versus photography. So you can understand what a 360-degree orbiting shot is, or an upward tilt, or an ascending shot. Now, there's a lot of different. You're really just directing a scene at this point, but a lot of the times it comes down to the reference image. So I'll wrap that one up. There.
Great point. All right, well, let's get into tool number 3, which is Krea. Awesome tool, something I've been using quite a bit. I use it for a couple of different things right now. So primarily for me, which this is a little hint into tool number 4, but it's one of the tools I use for upscaling specifically. So outside of Midjourney, I will take things into Krea to get that additional upscale. The upscale part of it is free. And so I'll also mention this. With Krea right now, I am not on a paid plan. So everything that I'm utilizing it for is just on the free plan. I have paid for it before. You do get some additional customization options, of course. But upscaling, free, totally free. It directs in a very similar way in terms that, here, actually I can show you. So let's go ahead and share screen. We're making this a very visual episode here. So let's just pull up Krea. I'll go into Enhance. Let's just take an image that I've already done. Maybe let's just go in here. And you basically have these options here that exist with the prompt, the strength of the AI that you're going to use, how much you want it to resemble the existing image that you have, and then the clarity component. Those are typically, I think, the main things you have here. There are some other things like scene transfer if you want to remove the background, for example, and change that out. But this is pretty powerful. I like to go in here and play around to get that additional detail information, right? So you can obviously see in this example, image with the clouds. I love the cloud, the shape, but it does lack maybe a little bit of texture, right? Like, and look, I'm not a cloud expert. Let me be clear. I'm not a cloud expert, but like, I think from an image standpoint, I want to add some personality into the clouds. And so this is kind of what you can get with these AI enhancement upscalers, is add in some of that strength, how much I want it to resemble it, some of that clarity, and then obviously creating a larger file size. So if I'm trying to print something out, this is for a client that wants something like that, I will put it in here and just sort of find wherever that sweet spot is, right? So like this one, the clouds are a little bit less. This one, I think, is sort of a little bit more of the sweet spot I was looking for, where it's got more of the texture, but it's not overdone, right? So this is a nice way to refine that. I use Krea primarily for that. I also use Krea for, I would say, like photo restoration. So for example, if I've got an image that is very low res, like this. Let me just zoom into this, right? This is a mush, right? This
Pixels.
is a picture. This is a picture of a painting, right? So this is about as low quality as you get, and it was taken on like an older phone. So you could do this, right, where you adjust the strength, resemblance, clarity, and turn it into like something like this, right? So it's just a little bit cleaner. Okay. Now we're kind of getting somewhere. And that wasn't quite what I was looking for, so I ran it again, right? And now you've got a lot more detail here, right? You've got more detail into the actual strokes of the painting, which I think is an interesting approach, right? Now, you could say, hey, look, those waves are a little bit sharp. The background's a little bit sharp. But, I think that's where, maybe even taking this a step further and stacking another tool on top of it comes in, because I could soften the sky. I could soften, the waves or whatever it is, right? And I've done that before too. But the point is you can add those really fine details into an image here. You can see this A and B, right? Before, after. And depending on how much you want to change the image, that's where these sliders come in. So I think that's use case number 2 for me. And then lastly, I'll just go into generate, which I think is a very, very cool use case. Is basically like, I think this takes shape more in like a product capacity, but this example I think should do the trick. I could take an image from Midjourney, put it into this generate feature of Krea, and adjust this AI strength to my liking. And as you can see on the image on the right, this is just adding details. Unsolicited advice in terms of the details that it's adding, right? So some of this I could really like, some of it maybe I don't like. But you could just start to see how you could take this in Midjourney, and rather than trying to describe all those things into an image or just looking for a creative partner in all this, I could just drop this in here and just go from, it's so cool. And then, the icing on the cake is, let me take this paintbrush here and I'm just going to paint something on the shoe like this. Okay, now it's going to take that into account with the image. How sick is that?
Matches
right?
the texture. Solid.
It's just insane capabilities. And so, like, if you're a product designer, somebody that could utilize something in this capacity, or you're just looking to expand on something you've already created, this is a phenomenal tool to do all that. And again, this is all just on the free version. That's all I can really tell you about right now. But obviously, you can see this is an extremely powerful tool to have in the tool belt. Rory.
Does have some interesting video capabilities, too. Have you tried the video on there?
I actually haven't tried the video capabilities, but tell me more about it.
It's interesting. It's more like, at least from my experience, I did it for a couple days. More surrealist in nature. It's not super precise like anything you're seeing on Runway. It's got a lot more creativity baked into it. So very interesting in that sense. But I think it has its own specific use cases, right? It has a video upscaler too, which is nice. That's something that a lot of the other tools don't
I
have.
didn't even know that.
Yeah, so that's a good little like tidbit there, because I think that's what me personally, that's what I'm missing. And Topaz is something that I use for upscaling videos. It's okay. To me, I have to add a lot of frames to make it actually super, clear. But that also takes me like 45 minutes to render. I think it's probably my hardware that sucks. But it would be, that's just, I don't have time. I don't have an hour to wait for something to render to see if it's okay or not. Because then if I have to run it again, it's another hour. So I'm like, all right. If someone could make it as easy as Krea or our next tool, I would really appreciate it. So if there's any developers out there who want to make $1 billion, a video upscaler that has a nice, super easy to comprehend UI, that would be very helpful, because you get into Topaz and it's like, I don't even know what half this stuff means. It's just really, I'm like guessing.
I was wondering about that, because I did see that Topaz had something out with video upscaling, and I didn't know anybody that had tried it. So that's interesting. In the videos that I saw, I wasn't like overly impressed either.
Usually, it makes nominal difference, I think. I mean,
like usually you can make cherry pick something in a hype up of a product or a feature that makes it look extremely good. I thought it looked okay, and so
before some of the updates, they used to just have all these different models that you could use, and it was just like there was no description. It was like Chronos fast. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, why? What model am I choosing for what reason?
Product hell,
Probably could have gone and done my research, but at the moment I was just clicking buttons. I was like, let's just see what happens here. So that one's, whatever. People ask me about it a lot, so I really wish I had a better one. Krea does fairly decent, but also feels like when you upscale it too much or don't have the right settings, it like desaturates everything into, or not desaturates, like softens everything into looking like 3D renders and not like realistic. So there's I haven't found one. If anyone has it, drop it in the comments, please.
Yeah,
I'm sure people
same.
are doing it with comfy UI in some way, shape, or form that they're hiding from all of us. Also, drop those workflows if you got them.
Well, let's get into tool number 4, which is the yin and yang of Krea, right? Which is Magnific. You are using Magnific a ton. A lot of people listening to this podcast have probably used Magnific as well. Does some upscaling. Probably the best upscaler, would you say, right now that exists in terms of AI upscaling?
I think so. That's just my own personal opinion. Look, I've tested a bunch. It's just, to me, my personal preference because of the level of control that you have and like the different features that it has. It's expensive. Don't get me wrong. I wish personally, I love the tool. I wish it wasn't as expensive, but this is again something. Why am I going there? Because Midjourney's upscalers to me don't do what I'm looking for them to do, and that's not to say that theirs are bad. It's probably not a big concern of theirs. They're worried about image generation, not upscaling. But for me, I really like to get those finer details because I feel like that makes a big difference. Just like the way you saw the clouds, right? They make a
Question
big
for
difference.
you. With something that you're doing in Runway, do you find that you need to take those images into Magnific before you drop them into Runway? Are you
Makes
doing
a big
that?
difference. Makes a big difference. So the lower the res of the image, the harder it is for Runway to generate, the better it is. Like you used to lose resolution in Gen 2. Now we're at Gen 3. Gen 2, I'd put in a really high-res image, and it would, like, shrink it down and, like, make it all pixelated. But now, it feels like it transfers one-to-one. So I'll show you even, like, the, from that chicken sandwich before, going to make me hungry before lunchtime here. This is the starting image for that. Now, might not be able to notice all the fine details, but if you look at certain pieces, like the depth of the crispiness, and then also like the sauce, it just gets way more textured, right? Like there to more textured, to get a little bit more light gloss. Like these are simple things, like the bun up here too.
Zoom into that a little bit more if you can.
Let's see. So
yeah, this is great. I think that's where Magnific really shines above the rest. Is just you could keep zooming and zooming and zooming, and it's just insane how it puts it together.
Like that is just crazy. From like even just like the char on the bun, it becomes so much more defined. And then let's see here. Pull this down. You're looking at the crispiness of the chicken here that goes from like somewhat fuzzy to Like really, that's again, that to me makes a difference in Runway.
That starts to appeal to a different senses at that point too. So when you're talking about food, it's just an image. I mean, resolution is so important, right? Because then you
100%.
can activate other senses like taste, like smell, that you can pick up through how clear that is. And I think that makes a ton of difference. This is a perfect example for that.
So this one, because it's not as close up, right? Like it's fuzzier. Like you just look at the chicken here. Like this top patty. This is one that we'll focus on. That one gets a total upgrade and looks way more, like food photography. We even get down this bottom one, right? Like it gets more defined. This gets, the lighting gets enhanced. Especially on the ketchup, like you just see these little like contrast definitions up here to like actually separate the ketchup from the chicken. And if we even zoomed in on that, again, guys, these are really small details, but they make a difference. Like just the difference of that is big. So like that to me is some of the best. Now, this is where I think it really shines, is putting like a realistic touch on humans, which I think is the best that is out there. Because if we go and look at the original gen, right, like that's this person's face. Now, it has wrinkles baked into it, but now we really add some natural skin texture to it. There's probably some things that I would edit in this photo to begin with, like this upper lip. But you start looking at the difference here. They don't make it this the easiest to control in Zoom. But when you're here, right, and you see like that, just even like these cheek dimples and wrinkles here, the layers and the texture of the skin, this becomes so much more insane when you do it, right? Because there's a bunch of examples. This one, to me, I used a different level of fractality on it, which means it's going to be a little bit more creative. So, like for this one, let's zoom in on her face, right? Like you can see the difference in her eyebrows and her forehead, right? Like the difference there between that and that, like we're looking way different. Some of the skin, right? Like maybe I'd make some different adjustments here on the skin, maybe post or whatever. So this, I look at just the eyebrows itself and just the forehead.
I mean, you could start to actually know how old that person is.
Yeah.
Versus have a general idea without it, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here is those forehead wrinkles, right? The crow's feet, like all those components of a face that really are indicative of, age.
So even when we look at this person in the background, right, because they're fuzzy, they get a little bit more definition.
Yeah,
right? Like that becomes a little bit more defined. You can see the contrast. You can see the shadowing, the lighting. She might have a little bit of a ripply chin because we're so close. But hey, this is what I like it for, is making stuff natural, because not everyone is perfect, right? Not everyone looks like a model. Here, like to me, these are great. Like this one defines the contours of her face. Sometimes to look out for is it likes to add freckles for some reason, like every AI tool for whatever reason. But you get what you don't get with a lot of the other upscalers is like this like blemish here, right? Like this is a blemish. Most people would want to airbrush that out. Me personally, I like it in because it's just real, right?
Yep.
Like these skin lines are real. Gave her a little hair on the upper lip. Sorry about that, AI lady. But even like the hair gets more defined over here and things like that. So these are tools like this.
Does Magnific have the capability to make those little healing or spot removal adjustments in the tool?
No, I wish it did. That's one thing that I wish it had is like, let me just do this instead.
Maybe that's the perfect segue into tool number 5, Rory.
It is.
Do you want to go ahead and reveal tool number 5?
It's Adobe, everyone. Been trying to get off it for my entire career, but it still has uses. And Figma can try to take me away. Everything else can try to take me away. Canva, whatever, I still end up in Adobe. So generative fill to me is just super useful, especially for fine tuning, spot cleaning, doing everything you need to do from a fine tuning art perspective. It's unmatched, really is. So
I love the gen fill. Gen fill to me is just obviously a game changer because now you've got 2 options for in painting, so to speak. You could try it in Midjourney, doesn't work. Try it in Photoshop. There are some things that I use Photoshop for, like even in those restoration photos. I would take those into, just kind of fill in some of those gaps where maybe it's like a little bit unclear what this is, right? Or it's just like, okay, like let's just clean it up in Gen Fill. Or another like real big use case I use it for time to time too is just to expand the aspect ratio. So like my image is a 4 or 5, but I want to create more negative space above the person's head or below their feet or to the side. Perfect for that, right? I mean, so I think that's another one. One of the other things I probably would have used it for a lot more before we've gotten to this quality with Midjourney is probably like color grading, adding LUTs, things like that to get the tones I want. But now Midjourney is so good with stuff like that. That's really not that big of a need. The last thing I'll just say before I turn it back over to you is probably just text. If I want to put text somewhere and I don't want to do it in Keynote or Figma or anything else that I'm using, that's an option, right? If I want to put the text behind a person, obviously like Photoshop's perfect for stuff like that. The composite stuff, obviously, still got a huge need. So yeah, I mean, like masking, right? Like if I do want to make some of those micro adjustments to, I don't know, dodge, burn, whatever it may be, right? So some of those post processes, heal. That's obviously heal's a great one, right? Like just cleaning up some things. So what about you?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, look, there's sometimes I like to screw around in there and kind of separate layers, right? So I'll go in and take deconstruct a Midjourney image, like mask certain layers, basically copy paste things and then add different depth value or different depth into it or change up with generative fill like certain pieces of a layer. But the thing that's great about it is you can go down to the pixel on the generative fill. So that's the one thing with Midjourney. Again, another request is that I wish I could zoom in on my photos a little bit to see what I'm actually selecting, because sometimes the finer details are harder when it's just like a full image that you can't zoom in on. But Photoshop, you can go in there and change 1 pixel if you want to. Right. You can zoom all the way in, which me is super helpful. But I love exactly what it said, like the generative expand background removal, which thank God, they have the selection tool also, which is like the auto select, which whoever's in here and still loves manually going and outlining an entire piece of an image in Photoshop, more power to you. That used to be the bane of my existence. I hated it. So that, like, those simple features, like, they're little ones, but they help. And even I do a lot of post process. A lot of times I have to soften some of the images up from either Midjourney or Magnific. Like Magnific specifically, when sometimes I just love it. I know the generation is not going to get any better. Just toss it into Photoshop, little soften here, little edit there, just because it makes it, so it's a whole creative process, right? I mean, look, there's what you can use all these tools in one workflow, and you can use all of these for specific things. I did this for the for the AI for the AI threats presentation. What I was saying, it was basically Runway Midjourney into Magnific into Photoshop to soften it up and make it look more realistic, and then take it into one of the animators and animate myself as a deepfake. So it's the other tools that are out there can do a lot of this stuff. These are just the ones that I think I've used probably the most. And if I had to say if I'm going to rely on it for client work or putting out something professionally, those are the ones I'm using.
Yeah, Photoshop almost seems like a must-have in that workflow if you're going to use it professionally, right? Just for whatever purpose, to clean it up, to post-process it, whatever that means to you, right? So if you're a photographer, maybe that's dodging and burning. Maybe it's sharpening, eyeballs, in terms of irises, eyebrows, things like that. It could be expanding it, like the ratio, like we said. I've had plenty of use cases for that. To your point, you're using it for completely other things. So I think like Photoshop is not going away anytime soon. It would be nice to have some of those things within the in-painting tool, like we mentioned, like a smart object selection or the ability to, like pinch and zoom, like you mentioned, get down to a more granular level on the edits, which I don't think would be that hard to do. I'm not a developer, so I don't know that for sure, but it doesn't seem like it would be that complicated. But man, that would make all the difference. That said, you'd still use Photoshop as an additional tool in your workflow. So
there's also some interesting plugins too. They just came out. I think Krea might have a plugin for Photoshop. Don't check me on that one. I think that might be more technical than it sounds.
Interesting.
But Krea and Comfy both have plugins for Photoshop. The other thing I will mention here too, any designers, this is just a hot tip. If you're on Illustrator right now, just remember this. There's a mock-up generator feature now, which is insane because that is just such a pain. So you can use Midjourney to generate, let's just say, like a blank model, like a model with a blank T-shirt on or a blank hat, whatever, then if you have a PN or a SVG or vector file of a logo or a design that you want to put on it, you go into Illustrator and use the mockup generator, and it'll move the image around dynamically on the model. So if my shirt's wrinkled, it'll integrate it with the wrinkles, so it doesn't have to be like this crazy process of what it used to be. So you can just move it all around. I can move it onto the hat, and then it moves onto the side, so it'll change the dimensions and the warping. That is insane. Whoever has done this before knows how much time that is and how often it never comes out the way you want it to, unless you're really good, which I wasn't. So keep that one in the back pocket, because that one's great.
I like that. That's a good one. I also like that text part of it, where it's like you take text in Illustrator, then you move it over to Firefly, and then you can basically just make a simple prompt in terms of the texture or whatever you want that text to turn into inside the letters, for example, into a banana or into a concrete or whatever it is. Like, brands could be using that right now. Probably not that hard to do. I haven't done it personally, but I've watched the steps. Seems super easy to do.
Super.
That looks awesome. I need to play with that. That's a good reminder to play with that as well.
There's so much you can do with the tools. I mean, it's really just like how creative you can get with every single one of them. Like I said, we're using a lot of these because Midjourney doesn't offer them in platform. If they did, probably just use them there. But it's also good because you can get to learn stuff. Like, I forgot more of Adobe than I remember, unfortunately, which is sad for me because I used to be in it all the time. But, having this in there now, it feels like I'm riding a bike on some tools where I, come back up, pick up some of these things and go, but I have to remember how I was trained. But the Firefly, I feel like I neglect it, and I probably should use it more because there's definitely use cases for it. But there's so many, man. There's so many. We just live, this isn't a 537 AI tool for marketing posts. Sorry, guys. This is just the ones that we think are useful and we can actually utilize today.
It's maybe my main takeaway is this, right? Anybody can technically become really good at Midjourney if you put in enough time. I think the real asset to have, both maybe for yourself or for a company that you work for, is the ability to stack things together into a workflow, build some sort of operation, because that's the difference. We talk about this all the time, actually, with all the Midjourney features. The more Midjourney features you know, and you know well, and you know how to troubleshoot and reverse engineer, probably the better you are at Midjourney in terms of doing this for professional work, to bringing that into the business fold. The same thing is true with workflows and adding these tech stacks together. Knowing the different use cases can unlock additional and more powerful ways to use these things, which I think is really, again, I think that's the takeaway for me here, is knowing how all these things work, the connective tissue within them, and then how to squeeze as much value as possible out of them.
100%. Because again, most of the stuff, also, it's just problem solving, right? Like when you can't do something in Midjourney, there's a tool for it, right? I can't upscale this big enough. What's the next logical step? Go find an upscaler, right? I can't animate this in Midjourney. What's the next logical step? Go find one, right? It's just simple things that have to be, also it's like a desire to actually get to a finished product and not just give up, which sounds so personal responsibility. But it's really, if you want to get to an end result, you can get to it. There's a tool for that. I mean, you look up, I can't turn this logo into a vector file. I guess I should just give up. There's an AI tool that turns logos into vector files, right? It's there. They're all there.
Put on your QA hat and literally find problems, because
there's so many.
I think there's so many. And to your point, the more problems you can present yourself with and think through and work through, again, the more you're going to level up and know how these things can be utilized and leveraged the most effectively. So,
totally, man. Totally. Woo. I mean, I created my logo with Midjourney, Illustrator, another AI. Essentially, I prompted in Midjourney. I took my logo out. I put it into Photoshop. I cleaned up the background. I took that into Illustrator, made it a vector file, changed up the colors, built around it, and then there's a logo. You can do some things if you know how to use some of the other tools. But that one, to me was pretty simple. I knew what I wanted. I just wasn't going to go and illustrate it in Illustrator because I'm just not good enough to do that in a time frame that's acceptable, guys. Like, if you gave me 2 days, 3 days to do it, fine. I'll go and I'll make it. But legitimately, I did that in 20 minutes, and I was like, okay, cool. The next thing on the list of 1,000. So, it's just what are you guys experts at? What are you experts at? What do you know how to use? What do you know how to use well? What are how can you apply this stuff to your current processes and just make things a little bit easier in your day to day? But that's my 2 cents. Sorry for getting on my high horse there at the end.
I love the high horse. And I think, as we mentioned, this is a great chance to think about your own tools, workflow. If you've got tools that we didn't mention that you think deserve to be on this list, if you've got workflows that we did not mention, let us know. Drop us in the comments, drop this on YouTube, ping us on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. You can find us. Let us know. We'll give you a shout out. We want to think about this thing as innovators ourselves. We're constantly looking for new use cases. So love that. Rory, man, this was another, dude, we filled this episode with tools. To your point, I think we need to do another one on ChatGPT. Yeah. But this was fun, man. Anything you want to wrap up with before we dip?
No, man, that was, like I said, I think we should definitely go in deeper on some of this stuff. Maybe we can put together some more workflows and things of that. ChatGPT is endless. And again, the last piece I will console with that is that, it doesn't have to be ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT has the vision capabilities and it's really good, but Claude works really well for prompt writing and for different, terminology. I tend to find different things on Claude than I do on ChatGPT. So if I'm looking for cameras or film stocks or any sort of like research, I find different things on Claude than I do on ChatGPT. So that's just something else to keep in mind too.
One of the best things I did early on with LLMs was run the same thing 2 or 3 times in the different tools just to see what results I got back. And I think that's an extremely great point. That still makes a ton of sense to do today. Just take the same thing, see what it gives you. Also, like for this episode, we're talking about Midjourney, but Claude is just exceptional at writing. Anything writing, I'm going to Claude. So, I mean, Claude deserves its love. It's an awesome tool as well. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great
honorable
way to wrap
mention.
this up. Yep, honorable mention, Claude. We love you, though. Anthropic, shout out. But yeah, guys, thanks for joining us on episode 6. If you haven't already, follow the show, whether that's Spotify, Apple. Drop us a sub on YouTube. We're growing there. I think we're almost up to 2,000 subs now in 30 days, which is just crazy. You guys are animals. So
killers. Awesome. Love it.
We appreciate the support, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Hell yeah. See you later, man.